actually think the left has come some way from that. I actually remember I wrote an article about 15 years ago, which actually started off by quoting The Nation, essentially giving this line, that why are people wasting time with sports? And now you have a sports editor or the sports writer of The Nation. So I think actually some of this stuff is changing within the places. In the film, let's move on. In the film, you talk about how the macho nature of American sports culture has created a homophobic climate. Can you talk about what professional sports is doing, if anything, to combat homophobia and discrimination against gay athletes, where the front lines in this struggle are? I know you've spoken a lot about the work of Pat Griffin. Is Pat here today?
She wasn't in the film.
She can come. Okay. Who's been a leader in this this fight for years. I'm just wondering, what's your take about where things stand in pro sports in particular? What the future looks like, and especially in comparison with, where the military is with some of these discussions, with the debate around stuff.
So. The parallels are very interesting because, except at the same time, one I feel like is a funhouse mirror of the other. Because when it comes to sports, it's can we have a space where LGBT people can compete, can be a part of something constructive and interesting and fun and exciting, and not have homophobia be this incredible pressure and cleave in the locker room. Then with the military, it's a battle that I think all people should support, because legalized discrimination should be opposed. But at the end of the day, it is about getting more soldiers. It's like, are you man enough to kill people? To go overseas and occupy other countries and kill people? And so, like I said, it's like the same way sports and the military are sort of funhouse mirrors of the other. I think this debate, it's the parallels can be very interesting as well. The compare and contrast of the two. And I'll tell you, you could see this in the way it's actually being taken on in sports, because there is no legal opposition, there is no legal banishment of LGBT people from the locker room. The same way there was actually, before Jackie Robinson integrated Major League Baseball, there was no legal coda that said there couldn't be black people in Major League Baseball. It was known as the gentleman's agreement, and every time the commissioner, a guy named Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis, was asked about it, he said there are no laws preventing black people from playing Major League Baseball. I don't know what you're talking about. It's not there. It was the gentleman's agreement, nothing put down on paper. And that same kind of culture exists in the big sports, in the locker room, about this agreement that makes homophobia something that's very acceptable. Now, how's it being taken on? I see it being taken on at the grassroots going up, which is another big difference from the Army. See, I'm a big believer that sports, it's kind of like you make it you do with it what you make of it. If you have a good coach, if you have somebody who cares about these issues, it can make a huge difference. And on a lot of teams, the same way today there are a lot of LGBT clubs in high schools, when even 10 years ago you never would have seen that. You have on a lot of teams at the high school level, at the junior high school level, coaches who are trying to make it more acceptable and more open for kids to be able to come out on both men's and women's sports. And I think that can have a real cultural ricochet effect moving up the ranks as people get older. And it's exciting and interesting when you read about them, because it's happening more and more. Like the quarterback, there's a college, it's called Bloomsburg College. Their quarterback came out of the closet last year. There's a great story of a young man in Western Massachusetts who came out of the closet and thought it would mean he would have to quit the football team. And the coach instead brought in somebody from an LGBT task force to speak to the entire team. And when when somebody, they said, okay, raise your hand, we're a family here, he's staying, but raise your hand if you have any questions. And someone raised their hand and said, well, do we have to shower with this guy? And the captain of the team stood up and said, hey, you're a quarterback, man up. And it's interesting the way the man up thing was switched to accept a gay teammate. And it's just the vernacular can be used all kinds of ways. And for women's sports, there's a mythology that for women's sports, it's some sort of Shangri-La for LGBT people, because you have examples like Martina Navratilova, Cheryl Swoops. But it's a similar, serious problem about players being able to have the space to be able to come out. And once again, it depends heavily on who the coach is and heavily on the culture that's created in the team. And that the horror stories are legion for young women athletes, especially because there's such this pressure on women athletes to not be butch, not be manly, not be gay. So it becomes like a kind of licensed homophobia, which I would argue is at the heart of things like the Playboy Women of the Olympics issue and Danica Patrick on the cover of Maxim magazine, and this new thing that's going to start actually called ESPNW, which is the way they're responding to such low coverage of women. They're just going to segregate it and say, oh no, we cover women's sports, it's over here. And there's actually, there are debates about this among women's sports professors and gender studies people about whether this is a positive or a negative, that they're creating this separate space. I mean, it's complicated. I think it's actually very problematic because it gives them this huge out from having to cover women's sports, and you'll see less coverage on the big shows, Sports Center and the rest of it. But the homophobia in women's sports is very real, and once again, it's about people being able to challenge it on the most grassroots possible way.
And let me ask the last question that I've got to start with, and we'll open it up to the audience after this question. Every year, the news is filled with stories about college and pro athletes committing sexual assaults and other forms of violence against women. I guess Ben Roethlisberger was the last really honest version of this. Do you think this is merely a reflection of overall trends in the larger culture? In other words, that men's violence against women is no worse in sports? It's just that we hear about it more because of the prominent place sports has in our culture? Or do you think there's something quantitatively and qualitatively different about sports culture that feeds and reinforces men's violence against women?
Well, one thing we know is that it depends on the sports, and sports that are violent tend to spill over into the home. That there's greater instances of spousal abuse in sports like football than, for example, baseball. And these are statistical facts. There's also higher incidences of divorce. And there's a lot of studies that now show that there are connections between the concussion issue and violence against women in the home. Like, these things are very intertwined. And I think if you're talking about the college level, I mean, I think a lot of this is connected to the fact that college football in particular, but college basketball also on the men's side, is such a racket. And in that the athletes, of course, they generate millions and millions of dollars for these institutions and don't get paid for it. And so how are athletes then attracted to different schools? One of the things that's used is women. And the idea of what Dr. King called thingifying women as a way to attract people to the school. And it's ridiculous, and it creates a kind of gutter economy on many college campuses that says, okay, you want to come here because this is what our women look like, and they're going to show you around when you visit the campus, and they're going to have these special delegated people to do that, and it's really built deeply into the corruption of the sport, and it's kind of sick. I got to tell this story real quick if I could. I spoke at the University of Oregon, and people may know the University of Oregon. It's the #2 ranked college team in the country. The school itself is suffering from a serious budget deficit. Professors had to take a week furlough to make up the deficit, and at the same time, the football program is just paid off because Phil Knight cut a check, who's a Oregon graduate, for $100 million to the athletic department. $100 million, while the buildings are falling apart on the school. And this is just a crazy thing. You go to the school, and first of all, I can tell you that their coach, a guy named Chip Kelly, just became the highest paid state employee in Oregon, signed a $20 million contract. And he was doing an interview on Dan Patrick's radio show, and Dan Patrick asked him, hey, now that you're a big successful program, do you ever get any celebrities on the sideline? And he was saying, well, yeah, we got this person, and then he said, and then we've got our boss, Phil Knight. And it's like, well, actually, he's not your boss. He's a booster, he's an alum. But he said, boss, there's a little slip there. And I went to the campus, and they have this new structure there, a $47 million building that was just built, called the Jaqua Center. That's the Jaqua Center. And this building is like the nicest building I've ever seen in my life. I mean, it's this all glass building, and you walk in, and you've got like 6 secretaries there to meet you. And 3 are men, 3 are women. They all look like Italian models. They were wearing skin-tight black outfits from head to toe with big purple swooshes on the front. And That's the Nike symbol. And I walked in and I was like, oh my God, there's like a fountain, all this stuff. And keep in mind, the campus is in bad shape. And it's so beautiful. This is where the athletes go to get help with their homework. And professors aren't allowed to go above the first floor. It's a 3-story building. You can't go above the first floor on a campus building. And I'm looking around this thinking to myself, geez, we're in Rome. These are the last days. This is unbelievable. And the person I'm with says to me, dude, you gotta go to the bathroom. And I said, well, actually, I don't have to go to the bathroom at all. I'm doing well, thank you. And he said, no, trust me. The experience at the Jaqua Center will not be complete unless you go to the bathroom. So I walk into the bathroom, and I'm like, okay. And, you know, I'm looking in the mirror. I figure I'll wash my hands. And I'm looking in the mirror, and I look behind me, and in the inlaid black marble that made up the bathroom walls, and by the way, seriously, the bathroom was nicer than my house. I would like moved into the bathroom. But like inlaid in the beautiful sculpted black marble is a woman's face. Sculpted into it, like a middle-aged woman's face. And I'm like, there's a woman's face in the bathroom. That's really strange. And so I walk out and I say, yo, there's a woman's face in the bathroom. And he said, yeah, that's Madeline Knight, Phil Knight's wife. She's sculpted in there. And I said, that's kind of weird. And they said, no, that's not weird. You know what's weird? You go into the women's room, it's Phil Knight's face staring at you as you go to the bathroom. Now, I raise all this, son, because
bring it home, bring it home.
You can't raise the question about all kinds of, Mike was cut. You can't raise the question about all kinds of illicit activities and just an absolute, the horribly twisted and warped relationships on a modern college campus without looking at the fact that the very system itself is corrupt and rotten to its very core.